Donald Trump has stirred up global headlines by threatening to send U.S. forces into Nigeria to protect Christians from militant attacks. Some call it bold leadership, others dangerous interference. But what's really happening behind this brewing crisis in Africa's most populous nation? In this Q&A, we're going to break down what's driving the violence, who's behind it, and whether U.S. intervention could change anything or make the situation worse. Before we get started, if you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you can stay on top of everything out of Washington and around the world. My name is Joseph Hammond. Let's get started. President Trump has labeled Nigeria a country of particular concern over the continued violence against Christians in that country, which has resulted in thousands of deaths. This is a designation from the U.S. State Department that labels Nigeria as a country which has a really worrying situation vis-a-vis religious freedom. And that's exemplified by the fact we're seeing the murder of thousands of Christians, dozens every day on the aggregate in Nigeria right now. President Trump first labeled Nigeria a country of particular concern in 2020. President Joe Biden removed that distinction, and now it has been labeled a country of particular concern again. Over 3,000 Christians have been killed in Nigeria this year alone, according to third parties that are monitoring the violence there. What's driving this conflict is a complex mix of religious animosity, of competition for scarce resources, primarily between Fulani Militants, Boko Haram, and ISIS in Nigeria. And all these groups are involved in violence against Christians to some level. And finally, the erosion of state authority in many parts of Nigeria. There's definitely religious tensions in a country like Nigeria, where roughly the top of the country is majority Muslim and the bottom half of the country is majority Christian. Now, of course, you can find Muslims and Christians virtually everywhere in Nigeria. That's just kind of how it works out. And this has created a natural tension in the political system in Nigeria, and that has played out into conflicts such as this. And we're seeing increasingly those conflicts between the Fulani groups spread from the north increasingly into the south. It's also very much about land. You have Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. The population is growing in Nigeria, and that's putting a lot of pressure on traditional herders. The Fulani are one of those groups, perhaps the most diffuse group in Africa, herded cattle and other animals. And that lifestyle is increasingly under pressure from farmers and as population grows. And I think while Nigeria has seen rounds of this sort of conflict in the past, what's different this time is that a lot of people I spoke to on the ground feel that they are not being heard by the central government. The dynamics we're seeing in Nigeria can be seen across the Sahel, including in the response. I mean, you've seen local militias formed not only in Nigeria to defend communities, but really across the entirety of the Sahel. And this is something I saw firsthand when I embedded with the VDP, a militia in northern Burkina Faso that was trying to defend small villages north of Kaya in Burkina Faso from terrorist attacks. And it was very much an interfaith affair. This was a militia which included Christians, this was a militia that included Muslims, and this was a militia that was headed by an animist leader. So clearly faith discussions around this conflict are quite complex, and there's often other dynamics, tribal dynamics at play here as well too. And I think it's really important to highlight that while the majority of those killed in the attacks have been Christians, there's also Muslims that have been killed in these attacks. And that's coming from third-party groups that are Christian observers that are looking at religious freedom of Christians. They're the ones reporting that a large number of Muslims are also being killed. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has improved in some ways from his predecessor in the fact that he has brought into power a more religiously diverse cabinet. The previous President Buhari was from the north. He was a Muslim. He was a former general. In fact, he was a strong man in a previous government. But Bola Tinubu is really cut from a different cloth. He's from the south. He's the former governor of Lagos. He's a Muslim himself, but having grown up a Muslim in a majority Christian context, he has included with him many Christians in prominent roles throughout his government to a much larger extent than there was in the previous government. This is a very complex situation in northern Nigeria, and the conflict is spreading. And while, the United States could use airstrikes and special forces raids to attack militant groups in Nigeria and to attack terrorist groups in Nigeria, the situation is very complex there, and it's unlikely to see what the path to victory would be. Though obviously there could be efforts to improve the situation and improve security in northern Nigeria, improve the capabilities of these various militias I've talked about to defend themselves, and obviously to improve the capabilities of the Nigerian military to protect all of its people, regardless of their faith. And that's something that when I talk to people on the ground, that's the solution they would like to see. They would not like to see a U.S. military intervention. What they would like to see is U.S. support for the Nigerian government and military to expand its capabilities and capacity to defend people in these areas of Nigeria where we've seen really these gruesome attacks on civilian populations. A U.S. military intervention in Nigeria would definitely complicate the situation strategically for the U.S. and Africa. Obviously, terrorist groups would use this as a rallying cry to say, hey, look, we are fighting a much bigger, conflict against the U.S. This is not a local issue. And I don't think a lot of African nations would support a U.S. military direct intervention. I think there's a lot of confusion right now, people I'm speaking to in Nigeria, about what Trump's comments mean. A lot of people in Nigeria feel that this is, the Trump administration threatening a military invasion of Nigeria or attack on Nigeria itself. But I don't think that's really what the president meant. I think he's very concerned about the massacre of Christians we're seeing in Nigeria, and he wants to ameliorate that situation. I think there's a great disconnect between what the U.S. is saying and how it's being interpreted on the ground in Nigeria. This brutal cycle of conflict has played into a number of failed states we've seen across West Africa. In the last decade, you've seen a number of coups launched that have toppled democratically elected regimes or civilian regimes and replaced them with military regimes aligned with Russia. Regimes that the military feels will make it easier for them to fight the war against terrorists. And I've talked to a number of actors on the ground and also with missionary efforts focused on the persecution of Christians abroad. They want to see a focus on diplomacy and support. They are less keen on a U.S. military intervention in Nigeria or other countries in the Sahel. My name is Joseph Hammond, international correspondent with the Washington Times. This has been my explainer on the situation in northern Nigeria, and I do hope you hit that subscribe button.